Okay. All right. Sorry again about that delay. Always takes a little bit longer the first time just to get everything connected here. I'm Ted Pavlic. This is SOS 212, System Dynamics and Sustainability. I heard some apprehension about possible use of calculus, and I will, I think, reduce that fear today. A lot of this course is about actually what you do after you've learned what calculus is, but don't want to go through the trouble of actually using that calculus. And so using computational tools so we don't have to resort to the math. But we'll get to that here in a minute. Those online, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat throughout, or if you'd like to unmute, I do have an earpod in, so I should be able to hear you. If anybody asks any questions from the room, I'll repeat them and vice versa. And then there's also some other ways to put in input, as well as people in the room. So we'll get to that here in a second. So let's make sure that, all right, well, so slide advance, we'll just do it the old fashioned way, I guess. If I can get my mouse back. All right, so yeah, this class is all about dynamics and learning how to, there we go, is all about dynamics. And so dynamics are processes that change, processes that stimulate change over time. So there's a lot of things that change over time, and the dynamics are the things that underlie those. So in SOS 211, you got a taste of the calculus behind that. So we can describe those dynamics by using mathematical expressions to model those processes. So, you know, when Isaac Newton looks out at the sky and he sees the orbits of planets, then he can hypothesize about gravitational forces and so on, that he can then say, well, if those things exist, what are some predictions of those models? And he can formulate those using calculus that help us predict where the moon will be, if given that we know where it is now, where it'll be a little bit later, and then we can test those predictions. And so Newton didn't have the computational tools that we have today. So this was the best that Newton and Leibniz and so on could do. But now, so Newton's mathematical tools would turn those math into these concrete predictions that then we could then say, well, if this actually predicted what we see, then we have a better idea that gravity is a thing, for example. But we are going to focus less on the math part and more on the systems thinking part of, where did that, what does it mean for there to be a gravity? What does it mean for there to be, feedbacks related to global warming and so on and so forth that could be described mathematically? But what we're going to find is that once we sort of get the basics of how we could write them mathematically, instead of going through the tedious process of solving for that expression over here, we'll be able to load these basic models coming up from our kind of systems thinking into the computers and allow the computer to do the hard work for us. And we can then just look at graphs as opposed to equations and then compare, do those graphs do the things we'd expect? Do they do anything interesting, and so on and so forth? And so that's kind of where we're going with this, is by thinking about these systems, taking our systems thinking, combining them with computational tools so that we can get quantitative predictions without actually having to go through the tedious process of doing the math by hand. So even if you don't necessarily think you could remember how to solve this by hand, I'm not going to ask you to solve this by hand like you might have done in 211, but I will say it's good to know roughly what this means. But I think through 212, you'll actually get a better intuition as to what this thing here means. But you'll be using these tools to help get that intuition. And so we'll learn that if y is some parameter like temperature on the planet, and if we think the temperature on the planet has a positive feedback, so that if it gets hotter, it will tend to, if it is hot, it tends to get even hotter in the future, then we can model that positive feedback using an equation like this. But we can, instead of writing this as an equation, we'll end up writing it into a format that's a little bit more graphical that we can load into a tool that will end up, rather than saying solve, we'll effectively say plot. And then we end up seeing, well, this is what temperature does over time if temperature has this relationship. So So yeah, even though this once was called Calculus 2 for sustainability or something like that, we changed the name to System Dynamics and Sustainability because really the focus isn't on being Calculus 2. The focus is being on more practical ways of thinking dynamically about the world. So that's kind of what we've got here. So like, yeah, no explicit calculus necessary. Calculus would only hold us back. Okay, so examples of that. So this is kind of a famous example of predator-prey, moose and wolves. So if you were to think about a system of moose and wolves, there are ways of writing mathematical expressions that would describe the population trajectories of these two coupled systems. So as you get more moose, what happens to the wolf population? As you get more wolves, what happens to the moose population, and so on and so forth. You could write math to describe all that, but what we'll end up building is something that looks more like this box up top here. And if you were following along or afterwards, if you click on this link that's at the bottom of this slide, which you don't have to do now. In fact, I think I might avoid doing it now, but well, let me see if I can manage to get my pointer to engage here. Maybe I'll just do it this way. So if you were to follow, or, pull up these slides afterwards and bring up that URL on the bottom of that, then let me see if I can get rid of some of this. You would get this little kind of tutorial that kind of shows the way in which the types of models that we are going to build. And so this graphical model here, which I'm not sure if I can zoom in on a little bit, maybe a little here. This is a diagram, which basically, if you're familiar with stock and flows models, this is a stock and flow diagram where we're saying there is a stock of moose, there's a stock of wolves, there are inflows into that stock, there are outflows from that stock. Same with the wolves, inflows and outflows. In this case, the inflows are births, the outflows are deaths. We know that wolf births are influenced by the wolf birth rate combined with how many moose are available. There's a lot of moose, you're going to get more wolves in the future. We also know that the moose death rate is influenced by the number of wolves that are available and how efficient each wolf is at finding a moose. And so you combine those things together and that affects the moose death rate. So this diagram here, which captures the coupling between these two populations, could have been written as a mathematical expression. If I were to drill down into each one of these inflows and outflows, I will find some very simple arithmetic, which tells me if I know, for example, the moose birth rate and how many moose there are, I can calculate the number of moose births per year. And that's a relatively simple arithmetic thing. It's just number of moose times moose birth rate. And that would be what I'd find inside if I were to drill down into whatever this thick arrow has in it. Likewise with all of these others. So we'll specify a couple of little tiny arithmetic equations. We leave out the formal calculus, but this really is a calculus expression. And what will happen with that, and in this little tutorial, we can actually move, I click view story, I think. I can actually step forward here, and the author of this will actually walk through the process of creating a moose population, of creating and then showing what happens if I hit play. If you have a moose population without a wolf population, then we see the moose population just going to grow to the sky. Of course, nothing grows to the sky. And so if we step forward here, we end up getting, well, we'll add a wolf population. If we had just a wolf population without a moose population, similar deal. If we were to simulate that, if the wolves have no food, their birth rate will eventually decline and the wolf population will taper off and go to extinction. But if we combine those two subpopulations together so they interact, and then were to simulate, then we get these interesting patterns, theorized patterns, where you can get oscillations, where you get boom and bust cycles of wolves and moose that are slightly delayed from each other with kind of a lagging relationship there as you couple those two things together. we could write the calculus of this, and we could, in theory, solve for these expressions. And there is some value to being able to solve analytically for these expressions. But in this class, we focus on applications where the shapes are more important than the actual mathematical structure of it. So we form models like this wolf and moose model here, and we'll end up using computational tools like Insight Maker, the tool that's embedded in the web browser here, or Vinsim, a tool that's installed on all of these computers, should be installed on those computers, as also is free and for you to install and download and run yourself. And that will allow you to generate these trajectories and investigate them and experiment with them like sort of your own little world in a box. And so you could then play with these parameters and see how it changes these outcomes without having to worry about doing the calculus explicitly. So, yeah, question. Yes. So, so Dragoon, have you used Dragoon in your other classes? Right. So if you've used Dragoon, that is another tool that's designed for this. This, I'd say, is probably meant to be a little bit more graphical. The Vinsim is a tool that's actually used out in industry. Vinsim is a tool that they use over in the business school. Dragoon was sort of developed a little bit more as an educational environment. This Insight Maker is kind of in between. It's based off another tool called Stella, which is a very popular one in industry. So there's a lot of tools in order to allow you to do this. And that's the other neat thing about this class. The tools that you'll get out of this class are generalizable. You see people in business, in management, in engineering. There's another class, IEE 477 over in the engineering school, which uses the same textbook as this class. So it's a 400 level engineering class about system dynamics modeling. They use the same textbook as this class. So these are transferable skills that you can potentially take out of this class. They use a tool called AnyLogic, whereas we use Vinsim, but they all do a very similar thing. They all have pros or cons. It's like Windows versus Mac, but it's ultimately, you can do the same sort of things with them. All right, so let me get out of this little tutorial, head back to here. All right, good, we came back. All right, and so again, the focus here is going to be on systems thinking. And so there's another great example that, how many of you have taken systems thinking? Like 220, I think, right? So quite a few. So you'll see a little bit of overlap. So systems thinking focuses on the qualitative side. So 220 system thinking focuses on the qualitative side of systems thinking. So positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops, and so on. We will talk about that as well, but then we try to add a quantitative side to that as well. So now that you've formulated a model where you see all these relationships, you can then ask, okay, well, what happens if we actually build such a system? What will that look like over time? It's really hard to wrap our brains around all of those different interconnections when things get pretty ugly. And this is another example that I'm going to borrow from this link here. So this bird feeder dilemma is a nice one. Let me see if I can view story here. So those of you who have not sort of played the systems thinking game, imagine if, I'm sorry, this, did that whole, so when it showed up there. Okay, I'm surprised that this didn't, let me see if I can move this over. Okay, good. All right, so this bird feeder dilemma here is one that, imagine if you find just by observation that when you see birds outside of breakfast, that makes your morning better. So it creates a pleasant morning. So we can create these, we can diagram out causal relationships. We think that birds outside of breakfast have a causal relationship on a pleasant morning. And so you can imagine that the sort of simplistic perspective here is that, well, maybe I should make a bird feeder, because ultimately a bird feeder, I'm hoping, kind of leading ahead, is going to lead to ultimately more birds. So a bird feeder is going to put more birds at the feeder, which my thought is going to further improve my pleasant morning. And so I see a bunch of positive links. So these look like positive feedbacks. And so stopping here, just thinking about systems thinking, I think, well, this creates an engine of pleasure. So this is an example of a reason for me to get a bird feeder. Once I get a bird feeder, then my enjoyment of these birds is going to skyrocket, and I'm just going to have good mornings all the time. Now, of course, when you have a bird feeder, you don't, there's also side effects. There's good side effects. So it increases the attractiveness of the garden, and that might actually further increase this pleasant morning. But, and it also helps deal with frustration. So it reduces frustration, and frustration itself reduces a pleasant morning. So two negative links can make a positive. So all sorts of positive reasons to have a bird feeder. But when you think further down into it, then you end up finding that let's see if I can get to that. For example, birds of the feeder increases spillage, which increases the need to buy new bird seed. That's what this thing down here is. So the birds eat the feeder means I need to buy new bird seed. The spillage means I need to buy even more bird seed. That is going to increase my frustration, which will decrease the pleasant morning. So now I'm seeing that as I get more and more birds, it's not always going to be a good thing. Eventually, this thing might taper off, and you might have like kind of diminishing marginal returns. And you can imagine that other things, like the bird feeder attracts squirrels. Well, squirrels are not what I was hoping to attract. And so those squirrels are going to reduce the number of birds at feeder. And so that's going to create a negative feedback. So putting the bird feeder there may actually end up scaring away all of the natural birds I had before the bird feeder because I attracted all those squirrels, and so on and so forth. And so as you can see, when you really think about all of the causal relationships in real systems, a simple system like this one, systems thinking by itself is really helpful to put these out on paper. But if we really then want to ask, should I get the damn bird feeder? It's really hard to tell that. And so that's the reason why we often need to couple these with quantitative tools. So we can actually then start parameterizing these things and say, how much joy do you get from the bird feeder? How much spillage does each bird cause? How many squirrels are attracted? Once we start quantifying these things, we can put that into a simulation tool, hit go, and then we can actually see, okay, so under these conditions, the bird feeder has a positive influence. Under other conditions, it might have a negative influence. And I think you can generalize this to think about things like climate change and so on and so forth. At what point does certain patterns of behavior lead to a really negative outcome in the long run? At what point, maybe under those, there might be some short-term negative effects, but it just moves the equilibrium and ultimately it's sustainable in the long run. So we can start asking those more quantifiable questions using the tools that we deal with in this class. All right, so let me get that guy out of the way here. Back to, all right, so zoom. All right, so eventually I'll get my sea legs in this room and not, all right, there we go. Okay, so bird feeder, all right. And so ultimately, what you will learn in this class, well, on the School of Sustainability's website, we talk about there are 5 competencies related to sustainability. If you ask what is sustainability, we'd say sustainability is defined by these 5 competencies: systems thinking, futures thinking, values thinking, strategic thinking, and collaborative competency. And it's my claim that we actually hit about 4 of those in this class. So we're learning how to deal with the complexities of systems. We're learning how to think about projecting things into the future. We're learning how we can think strategically about the future, and we're using simulation tools to make things more palatable to our audience, so we can actually use simulation to communicate to a wide variety of audiences. And so I think 4 out of 5 isn't that bad, and that's the reason why this is a 200 level course that we think is kind of fundamental. But it's also a course that it's non-trivial in your short-term careers to figure out exactly how to incorporate these quantitative models, which is the reason why it doesn't show up as a prereq for a lot of your other courses. But we do hope that these are valuable tools that as you marinate in different application spaces, you'll start realizing ways you could use these tools. All right, so that brings me to my first question slide. Every question slide that I give here will have a QR code and this short link on it. If you want to ask questions, you're always free to ask questions in the chat on Zoom, by raising your hand, by all these normal ways. If you'd like to ask questions anonymously, then you can use your phones or whatever, and you can go to this little Meeting Pulse link, this little bit.ly link down here, same as the QR code, and you can post an anonymous question, which I'll get up here. If I don't notice it or don't get a chance to answer it in class, I'll answer it later in the discussion boards and on the Slack channel. So if you're feeling shy and you don't want to ask a question, but you still have that question, then I encourage you to make use of this. So with that, are there any questions I can handle right now? Yeah.
It's not a mandatory requirement for the Slack.
No, but it's available for you to use. So I will post announcements on Canvas as well as on Slack. It's just the ASU Enterprise Slack. So if you would like to start discussion topics in Slack, that's fine. But if you don't want to use it, that's fine too. Everything's going to be on Canvas. Anything else? All right, so speaking of Canvas, what is on Canvas? And so this is a snapshot of a slightly older version of the Canvas webpage, but basically looks just like this. The main page on Canvas is going to have links to all of the really important stuff. This is a what I call a high flex course, so a flexible hybrid course, which means that if you want to come to class, that's great. When you come to class, make sure to wear the mask, cover your nose and mouth. But if you, for some reason, whether you're sick or inconvenient, got up late or whatever, want to connect remotely, if you feel more comfortable that way, it's fine to connect remotely as well. And you don't have to tell me. If you would rather just connect asynchronously, then that is also totally fine. And so I will post the recordings of these things. And let me just, I always get paranoid here. So I want to make sure for sure that that I did hit that recording, which I'm pretty sure that I did. Of course, I can't find my Zoom anymore, but yeah, it is recording. But the idea here is, if worst comes to worst, you can post, or you can check out the asynchronous recordings afterwards, and that's fine too. I'll talk about in a second, have these little like attendance questions that I ask, kind of random questions throughout a lecture, which are answered kind of in a similar way as those question slides. If you're not live during the class, then you have 24 hours until after I post the video to go on and submit your answer, which is just graded for coherence, not correctness, so coherence or completion. And so really there's 3 different ways you can access the course content here. You can see me every week, you can not see me at all. Either one of those are fine. But the links to Zoom are here. The links to the asynchronous, so the recordings are right there. And so you can get those right from the main page. So synchronous, asynchronous. And then the office hours, there's a TA, Eric, who I think is online right now. He and I will be holding office hours, I think, over Zoom. Right now, my office hours are by appointment, but once things kind of shake out this week, then I'll set regular office hours. But I'm happy to take appointments if you'd like them. Otherwise, other things on Canvas, so there's a lot of the links to some other helpful things are here on the side, but most of the course content you're going to find under this modules here. And so that's where I've got course information, final project stuff, all of our units, exams, etc. So let's take a look at modules. There's a lot of information in modules. And so when you go into modules, the thing I recommend you do is to kind of smash this collapse all button first. And so once you do that, it'll pull everything together and make it a little bit more manageable. And we can take a look at what the different sections are in there. So we see that we've got the course policies. That's where you find the syllabus, contact info, Zoom info, etc. That's all up there. The recordings you can all find in there. You'll also find an archive of recordings from other semesters. If for some reason the recording doesn't work well for this semester, or you just want to kind of hear it in a different way, you can find those there. And then there is a unit 0, and there is basically a syllabus quiz in there, complete that ASAP. I think it has a due date of like this weekend. And it's basically just going to have you look over the syllabus and it's going to ask you a bunch of questions about it. You need to do that to unlock all the rest of the course. And so make sure you complete that. Then the other major assignment categories, I think I added a lecture one too, just to make a quick access to all the lecture slides. But these are the main assignment categories here. So if you're looking for each one of the assignments, which we'll talk about here, you can find them all collapsed under these here. And then they're also peppered throughout each of the individual units. So there's multiple places to find the same thing. Some students want to go directly to the assignments. Other students take a unit perspective. So down here, unit A through, I think F, I think are the units we have here. So if you were to expand this unit, you'd find the lectures, you'd find any supporting material for the lectures, all the assignments, etc. So you can either find all the assignments clustered together, or you can find them kind of interdigitated with all of the unit content down here. And that's kind of how the Canvas is laid out. So it's a lot in one place, but I hope again, you hit that collapse button, it's not too bad. And in the end, makes it easy to find everything. If you do have any questions about course policy or anything else, email's great. Canvas messaging is also great. If you do email, I get a lot of email for different things, and something that gets caught in spam or whatever. If you put SOS 212 in the subject, then it'll make sure that it gets to me and doesn't get triaged off somewhere else. So make sure you put SOS 212. And it's also helpful to give me kind of a one-line synopsis of what you're emailing me about. So if I know it's something really urgent, then I can drop what I'm doing and take a look at it. Otherwise, I can wait till I get back to my office. And so, so that's just kind of email etiquette there. If you want to email about graded work, the TA does almost all the grading. And so if you do have a question about a grade, make sure to either send it just to the TA, Eric, the heat, or you can send it to me, but make sure that it's addressed also to the TA, because if you send me something, the first thing I'm going to do is just forward it to Eric to confirm with him. And so it's just easier just to short circuit that and go directly to Eric and maybe CC me. Yeah, so syllabus, make sure to check it on Canvas. You've got that syllabus quiz. If you're interested in the activity schedule, there's a PDF that kind of summarizes, in one page how things are laid out with respect to holidays and everything else. The course textbook. So there is a textbook by Moorcroft, which you need to get access to, but I provide it for free in PDF form on Canvas. You can also find it on the university library. It's provided for free there in electronic form. If you like a paper version, they do have a paper version at the bookstore. And like I said, it's a textbook that some other courses use too, but you don't have to buy it if you're okay with the electronic version. If you're interested in honors contracts, some people do honors contracts in this class. There is an honors contract info page there you can go to and read all about that and some ideas there. There's a bunch of Canvas stuff here. So I want to highlight this because I think a lot of students tell me they hadn't heard of this, but in Canvas, when you're looking at your grades, if a grade hasn't posted, you can click on that grade and put in a what if grade, and it will calculate the grade you would get if that assignment was graded that way. So if you're ever wondering, what score do I need on the midterm to get this? What score do I need on the final to get this? I actually, as an instructor, don't have access to that. So the best I can do is kind of like go into the grade book and then put in my own what if grades, and you'll get notifications that you've received a grade or something like that, which is kind of ugly for me to do. So, so it's actually pretty easy for you to go and do that. So check out that what if grades. It's really one of the few, as an instructor, nice features, I'd say, of Canvas. Instructors don't generally like Canvas, students do, but this is one of the things I think we all can agree on is a good feature. And then I mentioned VinSim and Insight Maker. If you need help for how to install VinSim, how to get set up with Insight Maker online, I've got some documents I put together here. So all that's under that course info page. I'm happy to take questions about that, but check there first. Under readings, so the way readings work is that before lectures, so it says like lecture A3. So that's Tuesday's lecture, a week from today. Today's A1. This is unit A, first lecture, A1. Thursday will be unit A, lecture 2, A2. So A3, that's Tuesday's lecture, a week from today. And so I'm expecting everybody has read chapter 1 before that lecture. So at home, what do you do while you read chapter 1? Well, I've put all the chapters in perusal as well as these other, how many people have used Perusal? Okay, good. So at least maybe half the people in class. Not sure about on. Perusal I've found is really a cool tool. If when you click on this read chapter 1 link, you'll then have another link that'll open up at the bottom of the page, open up in Perusal, and you'll be able to read through chapter A1. And I've highlighted some text that I think is kind of important stuff. And Perusal gives you credit for reading through the whole chapter and for interacting with the chapter. So if you see something interesting, you put an annotation, you say, oh, this is interesting, this reminds me of this, or whatever you like to say. If you see someone else's comments, you can then respond to those comments. And Perusal will give you an ultimate grade from 0 to 3 on your interaction. And there's a bunch of different ways you can get a 3. And I've kind of set the thresholds pretty low. So you leave a couple of comments, you read the whole chapter and comment on a few others. There's a couple other things you can do. So it's a way that kind of incentivizes reading through the chapter. As you're reading through the chapter, we've got these things called Canvas exercises. And so this is, you can kind of think of it like an at-home quiz that's not timed, that you can take while you're reading. And it kind of is sort of, these are kind of the milestones, or I guess the waypoints that I'm helping you kind of go through to move through this. And so they're usually in the same order as they're presented in the chapter. They give you kind of targets to look for as you're going through the chapter. After you've done the Perusal and these are kind of low stakes assignments, then we've got this reading assessment. And this will be a short, usually 3 or 4 question timed assessment that these used to be given in class, but when things kind of got all hybrid and COVID-y, then kind of turned them all into online. So these will be due anytime before class starts that they're associated with, but most people just do them the night before. They usually are 20 to 30 minutes timed. We usually can finish them a lot sooner than that, because they're only, again, 3 or 4 questions, maybe even 2 or 3 questions on a bunch of them. And you don't have to use Respondus or anything like that, but they are timed. And so they're supposed to be kind of comprehension. So these ones are supposed to help you as you're reading through. These are sort of summative assessments to see how well you did. And those are kind of the things you do whenever there's a reading. And there's basically about 1 reading per unit. So in the units themselves, this is generally going to be the structure. At the top of every unit is a study guide. It's an outline of a study. It's basically everything that we plan to learn in that unit. So if you're asking, like, what should I study? The midterms over units A through D, what should I study? Well, if you look at the study guides from the top of unit A through D, that'll tell you the things that I think you should study for that unit, the things that I hope you took away from that unit. So that's at the top of every unit. I'll give some optional reading. It's optional. You don't have to read it, but it's if you're interested in kind of an expanded view, or you have some other just general interests in the topic we cover. Then the lectures are organized here. So we've got the lectures, we've got the reading associated with the lectures, and so on and so forth. And so this is what I mean. The units take all of the stuff that's organized up high in Canvas and put it all together. So some people just like walking through the units. Some people just like walking through the assignments. They're found in those 2 different places. So, after you get through the whole class, these are kind of the things, the learning outcomes for the whole course that are kind of going to be assessed by the final exam. So hopefully by the end of this course, you'll be able to pick out systems where quantitative simulation really makes sense. Be able to use Vensim or Insight Maker, whichever one works best for you. I'm not requiring you to know both perfectly. I just need you to know how to do one of them. Parameterized simulation models from data. So we'll talk about things where once you've taken data about the real world, how do you actually put that into the sim, interpret the output in order to make interesting and compelling conclusions you can present to stakeholders, and then use those simulation results to do that communication to those stakeholders. That's kind of our goals here. And we are basically going to, before the midterm, we're basically working up to these dynamical system models. So we start with basic systems thinking. We go to causal loop diagrams, which those of you taken 220 or maybe some other courses have seen. How many people have seen causal loop diagrams? A couple, okay. So the CLDs, and then we'll build those into some basic system dynamics models in Vensim and Insight Maker. And then we have a midterm, which is kind of over the basics of that. And then after the midterm, it's all application of that. So we're going to make the system dynamics models, the simulation models we built before the midterm, more complex. And we're going to start modeling more realistic systems. And so systems, like the global oil system, for example, or global warming, or SIR models, epidemic models, which are very topical, and so on and so forth. We start doing that all after the midterm. And then the final exam is comprehensive, because really it's just the whole class is this material applied to these topics. And so the final kind of pulls all those together. Like I said, the book is available for free. And you can find the relationship between the book chapters and the lectures. Kind of covered all this already. Software you need: VinSim is free as a download. Insight Maker is free, but it's used through the web browser. We will also use spreadsheet software. I don't care if it's Excel or Google Sheets; they both work just as fine. And that's basically all the required sort of stuff there. So, any questions about this? Yeah. VinSim is one example of a system dynamics tool that's used in industry. They also teach VinSim over in WP Carey. So, it's one of the tools that's out there, but there's a whole bunch of system dynamics modeling tools that are out there. AnyLogic is the tool they use over in engineering. Any other questions? Okay. Questions online? All right, no questions on that there. Okay, so how's the grade work out for this class? So I mentioned we're gonna have these little attendance exercises that you can either answer live or you can wait 24 hours to do. Those are 5% of your grade. There are these things called muddiest point reflections. And so every week I give you this little Canvas survey that's graded for completion, coherence, not correctness. And I basically ask you 3 questions. 1, what was the clearest thing from the week? And you can answer it with 1 sentence or 1 phrase. 2, what was the least clear or muddiest thing? Even if everything was clear to you, if you were to rank all of those things from the thing I was like most transparent, most clear, to the thing that had a hint of opacity, that's what's kind of what I'd say your muddiest. And again, that could be answered in 1 phrase or 1 sentence. And then the third thing, is there anything that you'd be interested in learning more about? That you can answer with an NA, not applicable, or you can tell me the thing that you would like to learn more about. And that's what your muddiest point assignments is. You do that, it should take you a minute or 2. You submit that every week. I review those things and maybe give some just-in-time reflections on those things. Then the reading activities I talked about, there's the perusal exercises and the Canvas exercises you kind of do in sync, and then the assessments, which are kind of comprehension. Each one of them is 5%. There will be a couple of homework assignments every 2 to 3 weeks. These are opportunities for you to practice drawing causal loop diagrams, doing simulation models, and so on. And then after that, there is a midterm and a final. These are 2-stage exams. How many people have done a 2-stage exam before? Okay, so nobody here. So a 2-stage exam, basically going to be on a Thursday. You're going to get an exam, and it's modified a little bit for COVID, but on a Thursday, you're going to get an individual exam where you go through, you solve it yourself. It's a closed book, closed notes. You get 1 sheet of double-sided crib paper for you to have notes on, and that's fun. So then that will be Thursday. Then the next Tuesday that comes up, you get the exact same exam again, but you now have open book, open notes, and open anyone else in the class. And so you can collaborate on it. I don't give you your scores or the solutions between those 2 stages. So it's up to you to sort of figure out what were the things that were most difficult to you, and so on and so forth, and then work with each other to try to figure out what the right answers to those things were. So stage 1 is 80% of your midterm or final score. Stage 2, the collaborative open book part, is 20% of that. And that's how those 2 things work. And I think I've got an animation that brings those things together, and then the final project. So yeah, I think this is just me. So so I'm just kind of moving ahead here because I've got, I think, a slide where I've got this broken out a little bit more detail here. So again, for attendance, for those of you attending asynchronously, 24 hours after I post the lecture videos, you can do these attendance exercises. The attendance exercises will look like this. So I'm not going to do one right now, but when one of these comes up, then I can choose whether to use it or not. And I can say, all right, we'll have an attendance exercise. And then I'll ask you a question, usually over the last couple things we were talking about. You'll go to this URL, either in class or this QR code. You can do it in class or at home. If you're in class and you want, you can submit it on paper for me, but most people just do it online here. And you submit a question. Now, I'll ask maybe 3 or 4 of these during a class period. If you go to this link, it will give you, you could, in theory, answer up to 10. So you just leave that open on a web browser in a tab somewhere, and you don't hit submit until the end of class. When I say, all right, here's our last attendance question, then you submit that, and then I will, after that 24-hour period has gone by, we'll go through, review all those, make sure everything looks kind of coherent, and then sync that into the Canvas gradebook. And so that's a way that everybody gets kind of points for paying attention, even if you're not physically in the class. So that's the attendance exercise. Muddiest points, I kind of already mentioned these, the 3 questions. Then the perusal activities and the Canvas exercise and so on, I already kind of went through all of these, but if you need more detail, this is on the slides, which are available online. Homework assignments, I just talked about. Now the 2-stage exam, again, this just breaks it out. 80% of your score, totally individual, and then the 20% of your score is collaborative. For COVID, I need to make these remotely available. So we're going to do the stage 1 of both the final and midterm on Canvas with Respondus Lockdown Browser. And I'm going to give you extra time. So I basically will open the exam for, like, I think I've got for the, the stage 1 will be, the availability window will be Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. It's still a timed exam, but I'll give you 90 minutes. So once you start it, you got to finish it in 90 minutes. But you can start it anytime Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. And then Sunday is kind of a break. And then stage 2, I'll also give a 3-day period. Basically, I think Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And during that whole time, it'll just be open. And because it's a collaborative exam, you can just leave it open as long as you want and keep working on it. If you submit it, you can even submit a new one. I will take the latest submission, not the highest score. So, so you have 3 days to collaborate with people. You can collaborate, with people in person. You can use Zoom. You can use Slack. You can use your own Discord channels, whatever. Just as long as they're people currently enrolled in my course. So no one else outside of the course. That's kind of the conduct we're looking for here. You can use your own notes. You can use the Canvas webpage. You can use the textbook. I don't want you to do anything outside of Canvas, though. Don't go Googling for other resources. So that's kind of how these 2 things work. So are there any questions about this weird 2-stage exam, since this is kind of a new thing, I think, for a lot of people here? In all the classes I've offered 2-stage exams, by the end of the semester, I always get positive feedback. People seem to like them a lot. So that's the reason I keep doing them. I used to do other things. I try to experiment with exams. This seems to be a nice balance where it's manageable for me to grade, and it also reduces the anxiety. So I'd love to hear your feedback after the semester. So think about that as you're going through. All right. Let me see if there's questions online. All right, I don't see that, okay. So then other things, so the final project. So there is a project in this where, because I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to model a significantly complex realistic system. And so around the middle of the semester, I'll tell you when, you'll form groups of about 3 or 4. I think in this class, I'll have to think about what we want if it would be, but I'm probably going to be okay with either 3 or 4, but probably no fewer than 3, probably no more than 4. And in your groups, you will develop an experiment with a system dynamics model, hopefully related to a sustainability challenge, but doesn't necessarily have to, but it's really strongly encouraged. And so you're going to basically come up with something of interest to you. Maybe it's recycling food waste. Maybe it's trying to deal with water in Phoenix. Maybe it's nutrient flows in an ecological system, like managing nitrogen and phosphorus or something. There's a bunch of different examples. And then you're going to build a system dynamics model that helps you experiment and then draw conclusions about that system that maybe help you suggest maybe how policymakers should act, as kind of an example there. So like I said, groups will form at about mid-semester. You're going to submit a short project proposal, like a page or so, telling me roughly what you plan to do. I'll go through those and make sure it sounds like it's tractable. So it's not too simple, but not too hard as well. And then after you submit that report, then you'll start working on your project. And the last week of class, the Wednesday of the last week of class, you will upload to Canvas a video presentation, as well as a final report, a 4-page final report with a structure that I specifically give on Canvas. And so you upload both of those. You're not going to be presenting to class. You'll be presenting with an uploaded video. And then after you submit that on the Wednesday of that last week of classes, everyone will be assigned, every individual student, not every group, every individual student will be assigned one presentation from another group and one report from another group. And you'll watch that presentation, I think they're 10-minute presentations, and you'll read that 4-page report. And there'll be a rubric that you'll fill out, and you'll leave some text comments, and you submit those. And as long as you submit, coherent, it's clear that you put some thought into it, you're going to get credit for your peer review. So both the presentation and the report peer review. I will read all of the peer reviews, and I will look at the presentations and the final reports. And then my grade for your presentation, your final report, will be a combination of the peer feedback as well as my feedback on these. And that's how you'll get these here. So no one has to stand up in front of class to present, but everyone will have an opportunity to see some of the work of someone else that has been done in class. So that's the way we're going to do those. And that's basically, I think, covers all of the major assignment categories. So are there any questions in class or online? Yeah. The perusal and so the question was, what is the difference between the perusal and the readings and the Canvas? So there's only one reading. So I'll say, so coming up for next week, you read chapter 1 in Moorcroft. Now, I've provided chapter 1 outside of perusal just for you to have as a reference. But if you click on that perusal link, then you'll actually have the exact same chapter 1 will be loaded into this perusal. And that will allow you to, as you're reading it, annotate or respond to existing annotations. And you'll get credit for that. Then in another tab, you could have the Canvas exercise up, and it will ask, 5 questions or so throughout, which will basically be these kind of guideposts. So, what does Moorcroft mean by this? And so you know that, okay, that's something that as I read through here. So it just sort of helps you with that reading. And then the Canvas assessments afterwards, after you're done with the chapter, you say, okay, now I'm going to start the 20-minute timed assignment, which asks me these 3 questions that are based mainly on memory, but I mean, I can't keep you from using the book. We only have 20 minutes until the timer runs out. And then that kind of is your so all of those things together hopefully make it so that by the time you come to class, everybody's got the book fresh in their mind. Let me see if there's questions online. Any other questions in class? Okay, great. All right, so let's try an attendance exercise just to make sure these are working. So everybody in class, online, and then later asynchronously, you can go to this URL, or if you prefer, you can scan this QR code. That should bring up a Google form. You will have to log into it using your ASU ID. If it's not letting you log into it, you may have to open a tab in Google Drive, for example, switch to your ASU ID and then paste the link into that tab. And once you log into it once with your ASU ID, it seems to remember that you associated it with your ASU ID and not your Gmail account. So, and if you don't want to do this, you can also, if you've got paper, I'm happy to take paper responses as well. That will show you 10, it'll say answer to question 1, blank, answer question 2, blank. Just leave it up until the end of class. And the question I'm going to answer here, or ask you here, is what percentage of your final exam score is the second stage of the final exam? So you just put in the percentage there. So I'll tell you the right answer is 20 in this case. But I should have asked you. That would have been pedagogically better for me to ask what the right answer is. But then if you would have put in 15, you would still get credit because I'm not grading for correctness, but I am grading for completion. If you would have put in rabbits, you probably would not have gotten attendance grade. So that's how that works. But then you just leave that up there. And then as I go through the lecture, another one of these might pop up. And then for question 2, you put that answer. And then eventually we get to the last slide of the lecture and I'll either say, go ahead and submit, or I'll give you one last question and then say submit, and then the class will be over and all of yours will be submitted. And by the way, there is a comment in the chat, and it says, I had created a group meet for this class. If you're in Zoom and interested in joining, here is the link. I'll also email the link on Canvas, and then there is a link there. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy with you collaborating on other platforms. Again, just so long as you're collaborating with each other enrolled in the class and not others outside of the class. So for the stage 2 exams, a lot of people, they worry about me like looking at their, if you don't want me seeing your conversations on Canvas or Slack about the exam, then that's fine. Also, during the stage 2 and the stage 1, I will be available during the normal class period during those Tuesday, Thursday classes, or I should say Thursday, Tuesday. So you can come to class if you want to work on it in class and have me kind of proctor you, but you don't have to. So we'll talk more about that as we get closer to it. All right, other kind of policy things, late policy in general, we don't accept work late. If you do have a good, there is flexibility though. So I might extend availability windows if some software program's not working well, et cetera, et cetera. If you know about something that's gonna prevent you from turning things in, and it's one of the kind of accepted things from the university, like a university sanctioned sports event or whatever, a religious accommodation, et cetera, you have to let me know ahead of time. So if you know about it now, you wanna let me know now. If you get sick, that is totally understandable, but you have to let me know after you come back and are well enough. So, if there was something due in week 2, you got sick, you weren't able to turn it in, week 10 is not the good time to say, oh, by the way, I was sick in week 2, can I turn that in? If you were well enough to attend class in week 4, I should have known about it in week 4. So that's kind of how those medical excuses should be there. I think I talked about that. Grade corrections. So to make things easier on me and Eric, after we give a grade to you, it's released to you on Canvas, you got 7 days to look for errors in that grade and get back to us. After the 7 days, I can't guarantee that we'll be able to make those corrections, because we don't, again, want in week 10 or week 15, everybody to come and say, oh, by the way, there are all of these little tiny errors that I'd like you to take a look at, because then it just makes it really hard for us to wrap up the course and get you grades in time. So you got a week after your grade is released to you. If it takes us 2 weeks to get the grade back from you, then you got a week after you get it. So it's not a week after you turn it in, it's a week after you get your grade back. All of don't redistribute anything that I give you. Don't distribute even though you have copyright on your own notes, ASU considers it a violation of academic integrity to sell your notes unless you're doing it as part of like the DRC or sales, internal. So don't sell your notes, don't sell my stuff, don't upload stuff to Chegg or whatever. Don't collaborate with students that are outside the class. If it's an individual assignment, that means only you should be working on it. Don't work on it with other students. Of course, if there's a general concept you need help on, then I encourage you to work together. But if it's, specifically, what's the right answer to question 4, that sort of thing, that really needs to reflect your understanding, not a group understanding, unless it's a group assignment. Academic integrity, plagiarism, don't copy things off the web and paste them in. Again, your words and anything you submit. Title IX, the syllabus has a much more complete stance here. I do want to say that, especially with this group work and things like that, that the instructor and TA are considered mandated reporters. If something happens in this class that you think is related to Title IX, you're welcome to bring it to my attention, and I'll help you as much as I can. But you have to know I am a mandated reporter, which means I will have to report it up the chain. If that is a problem, then there are counseling services at ASU where they don't have the mandated reporter designation that can help you and keep things a little bit more private. So those are things to consider if something ever does come up. Again, I rarely have to deal with these things. I don't want to say deal, but because there is group work and a lot of people in close proximity, it does happen. So I do at least want to mention it. Students with disabilities, if you've registered with sales, I'm very happy to work with whatever arrangements you've made with sales or what used to be called the DRC. So go ahead and do that. Any questions about policy? All right. Okay, so just a couple of minor slides just to set the tone for the semester as we move on into the first kind of real technical lecture on Thursday. And so, as I've kind of talked about already, computer-based calculation tools help us rapidly experiment with dynamical systems models. And so we're going to be working with models. And so really the question here is, what the heck does this word mean? Models. So as an example, we also use models to represent for these things. So we call these things models. So why do we call these things models? Does anybody have any reflections on what makes the things that are displayed here models? Yeah.
Because they both use the ideal way that we should look.
So that's one interesting answer. So the answer here, the suggestion here is maybe they're called models because they're portraying an ideal way that society thinks people should look. And so it's a model for how we should try to dress or bend, apparently. So that's one. Anybody else have any other thoughts about why we might call these models? Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, they're trying to sell the clothes on the model, so they need to attract people to sell their attractive clothes.
Okay, so that's another great. So the suggestion here was they're trying to sell clothes, and in order to sell clothes, they found that it's more compelling to show people the clothes on a person. So you either are modeling what people should look like, or you're modeling what the clothes would look like if they were on a person. So this jacket, when it's on a mannequin or on a hanger or folded up on a shelf, those might be very difficult for us to wrap our heads around. But when we put the jacket on a person, even if that person looks a little different from us, maybe it's a lot better than being folded up on a shelf or hanging on a hanger. And so both of these, I think, are valid answers for what are models. We originally called these fashion models. So I would say that the original use of model here was more the answer about the fashion. But over time, because we've seen these over and over again, it's become more the second. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I want us to think about as we start building our own simulation models. There are extra degrees of freedom that we can use in our models that can, even if we don't mean to, make our models lie a little bit to the stakeholders. So ideally, this red dress is, we're trying to say, what would you look like in this red dress? Now, you could put anybody in that red dress, but they don't pick anybody. They pick people that they view is a normative example of maybe someone that they think their demographic wants to look like. So instead of looking at the dress, they look at the person. And so that's an example where they can make the dress look better by putting in something totally irrelevant. So this is in simulation, we refer to this as garbage in, garbage out, GIGO. And so if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. If this is not a good representation of the rest of us, then we should not trust this model, even if the modeling approach of putting it on someone is a good one. So they say to you, oh, you don't know what that dress is going to look like? Let me put it on one of our models. That sounds like a great idea. But you put it on the wrong model, and you start looking more at the model and less at the dress, and it ruins the whole thing. That's what I mean by garbage in, garbage out.
Is that considered fudging the data, essentially?
That's, I mean, fudging the data, that is kind of another example of this, where what I would say, if I'm a simulation model, like that wolf, I showed you an example earlier with wolves and moose, and with these beautiful oscillations. And I could come at you and say, oh, look at these oscillations that were going to occur in every predator-prey system. But it turns out that those oscillations don't actually occur that often in real life. And so that's an example where these beautiful oscillations that you see are really the red dress on the pretty model. And in reality, a more realistic person wearing the dress might give you a very different interpretation of those predator-prey dynamics. All right, so that's a fashion model. So why do we call these models? It's my claim here that we're calling these models because they answer what-if questions. So they are an attempt to answer the question, what if I put on that dress? What if I put on that jacket? What if I put on that jacket and bent that way? I mean, I don't know why they're both bent that way, but my guess is they focus grouped this thing and found out that that's another degree of freedom they could use. And the jackets and the dresses look better if somebody's bent a little bit. Another example, so here is an animal model. So this is what my biology friends would call this. This is a laboratory mouse in the hand of an experimenter in a lab. And they refer to this as an animal model. It's not a mathematical model, but it's referred to as an animal model, a animal that is a model. Why would this be called an animal model? And online, feel free to respond as well. Yeah. Yeah, so the response here, just to repeat, was it's answering a what if question of, well, let's say we're injecting it, we're testing some substance, and we're saying, well, what if you were to inject the mouse with this particular substance? What would happen to it, to its physiology, to its behavior? But the question here is, do they really care about mouse biology? Is this a model of a mouse, or is it a model? Yeah, the back? It could be a model for humans. And so this is an example where we would like to know what maybe a pharmaceutical intervention would do to a human. But ethically, we aren't able to directly experiment on humans. And so humans have come up with an ethical loophole where we can find surrogates. So the mouse, just like the pretty model, the mouse is kind of like a real human. I mean, it's a mammal. It has big ears and a tail, so that's a problem. But otherwise, it has a lot of the same physiology as we do. And so if it kills the mouse, maybe we're not ready for human trials just yet. But if it works well on the mouse, then maybe we can move to something that's even closer to human analog. If it looks good on this guy, then maybe I can say, all right, I'm going to take that jacket and find another example of it. I'm going to put it on someone who looks a little bit more like it. And so on and so forth. Eventually, I buy the jacket and see what it looks like on me, and then maybe I return it or so on. And so this is an example where our models are not meant to be accurate. They're meant to be useful. So the idea here is it can be insightful because we focus more on what we share with this model than what we differ. So it's a tractable model system. It's something that even if our computer simulation models don't have all the details of reality built into them, they are close enough that we can still get insights out of it. That's a model. Other sort of examples here. This is the Bohr model of an atom. And so it's kind of a solar system model where electrons orbit the nucleus of the atom. Bohr later realized that although this was a pretty useful model, it didn't predict everything they saw in the laboratory. And he realized that if he made an elliptical model, he could get a little bit closer. Because again, this is sort of motivated by the elliptical orbits of the solar system, but it still didn't quite match all of the predictions that we're seeing in the laboratory. Later on, they got these molecular orbital theories you get in chemistry classes, which look where you get electrons that kind of float around in clouds, and who knows where they actually are. It's much more probabilistic, totally different than these, but so much better at predicting properties of matter at fine scales. And then there are other models of the electron, like the elementary model, the fundamental particle model here, that are more used at the nucleus scale, which are really meant to answer very different questions than these, but they still involve the electron. So the electron comes up in all these different contexts, but it gets changed in how it's used. And the trick here is to realize there are no electrons. There is no spoon, as people of my age would say. The electrons do not exist. It actually doesn't matter if they exist. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But they are darn useful because models that have electrons in them are pretty good at predicting what happens when I knock on this table. The properties of matter come out of this. But there might be some enterprising young graduate student down in one of the buildings over here who is now experimenting with a model of matter that doesn't have electrons. And she might find that model of electron, or that model that does not have electrons, is so much better than models that do have electrons that in 20 years from now, we won't be talking about electrons anymore. We'll be talking about whatever the thing that's in her model is. So we take for granted that electrons are real, but they are just mathematical entities we use to make sense of the world that are the best guess for now. So it doesn't matter how real they are. The same thing, Newtonian mechanics, gravity and all of that. It works super well enough for airplanes to be based on it. Airplanes, millions of airplanes every day, flying all throughout the world, not crashing, based on Newtonian mechanics. But Einstein came up and said Newtonian's idea of gravity was totally wrong. If you really want to predict what happens to gravity at fine scales, it's a totally different model. Gravity for Einstein is totally different than gravity for Newton. And yet, it doesn't really matter. Newtonian mechanics is so much more useful than relativistic mechanics because it's just really hard to think about, general relativity or even special relativity when you're trying to build an airplane. It's good enough to use good old-fashioned broken Newtonian mechanics. So it's broke, but it's still useful. And then there's other sorts of models that we see. So the Titanic, for example, whenever we deploy anything into the real world, we're learning something. We learned a lot from the Titanic. We learned how brittle metal gets in cold temperatures so that it doesn't even take a large iceberg to cause it to break apart. They've totally changed the way they build ships since that went out there because they needed a what if model. What if you floated this giant hunk of metal out in frigid cold waters? We don't know, let's do it. They did it, a lot of people died. So that's the reason why we'd like to do, whenever possible, modeling like this in a computer if we can. But if we can't, we better learn from these things that happen. And whenever we deploy anything, that happens. So the idea here that I'm trying to communicate is this idea from George Box: all models are wrong, but some are useful. This was not George Box. So how many people have seen this quote before? A couple, okay. So this quote is not criticizing models. That's not what Box is trying to say. Box was a modeler. Box was saying the practical question is how wrong do they have to be to not be useful? So Box was really saying for such a model, we don't ever ask the question, is it true? If truth is to be the whole truth, our answer will always be no. We will never build a truthful model. But we can ask, is the model, as broken as it is, illuminating and useful? And that's really what we focus on. So we build simple models that don't include all the details of the world, but still get us much farther than what we can get in our head. And that's what we're doing in this class. So this is a fortune cookie that I found that I really thought worked well with this class. Do not seek to find the answer so much as to understand the question better. Truth is not our goal, but better understanding the problem. That's really what we do with these simplistic models that we build in this class. So models are answers to what if questions. And with that, I guess I'd ask, do you have any questions about that? Does that make sense? And so the next time, where to go next here. So make sure to complete all those Unit 0 activities. There's basically one long syllabus quiz to complete by, I think, this weekend. Start your Chapter 1 reading for a week from today. If you'd like, though this is a little premature, go ahead and download VinSim and install it because we will be starting to draw causal loop diagrams next week. There should be VinSim on these computers as well, or create an Insight Maker account. These are kind of to-do list things that will help us as we move into next week. And also, just in general, thanks for respecting everybody's choices. Wear your mask when you come to class. But before you get up, let's do one last attendance exercise. And so that here in answer to question 2, and then you can hit submit after this, is what is the question that models answer? And so I'll put that in the chat as well. So question 2, what is the question that models answer? And then you can hit submit after that. And that is all that I've got for you. So if you have any questions or concerns or comments, feel free to come up to me after class. Otherwise, I will see you Thursday in whatever modality you prefer.
So I have this pulled up. I don't know if I'm doing it right.
Oh, well, so that first one, that was the 20. So I asked what percentage is the stage 2. So you just would put in, no, you don't put the question in, you put the answer.
Okay, what percentage is stage 2?
Yeah, so you would just say 20.
Got it.
And then here, I asked the question, what is the question that models answer? So in my definition of a model, I said models answer a blank question, and then sort of fill in the blank.
Awesome.
And then once you put that in to your satisfaction, then you can scroll down to the bottom and hit submit.
Thank you so much.
Yep. No problem. I get it. All right. Anything else online? I notice there's still a couple people hanging on.
So we have to download or make an account for the master media, or is that just
I'm sorry, for the which?
or for master media or inside?
Insight Maker.
Inside Maker?
If you want, so I'm gonna. Some people don't like Vincem, which is why I give the alternative. If you're happy with Vincem, you can use Vincem all semester and not even touch Insight Maker. I will give examples in both.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. All right, so it looks like only a couple of students are still online. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting because it's 4:15. If you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with me after.
Thank you. You have a good day.
You too.
So much engagement. I'm excited to see how it goes.
Well, hopefully it's not too much, but I think we've calibrated it so that it's not as bad as it looks.